We are on the air. And today, I have the undeniable privilege in interviewing J Elliott. Now, a number of you may know J Elliott because she might have interviewed you, or you listened to her interviews of interesting people. In the time that I've known Debbie, I think she's one of the most interesting people on the planet. So I threatened to interview her, and she has accepted the invitation. Let me tell you a little bit about what I know of Debbie, which is a little bit, but it sounds like a lot. Debbie is an explorer. She's traveled to sacred sites, as many as she could reach, and maybe we'll be sharing some of those investigations on this talk. She also is an artist. She makes puppets and has animated various stories of Beelzebub through her puppetry. She also makes recordings. She's recorded a number of the books of Gurdjieff and the Fourth Way, and probably a few others of other people that I don't know about yet. And she is a writer. I got to read two of her books,
Monkey Mind,
Robot Body, which is a parable for our age, especially right now. And a very interesting book of meetings with Mark Twain and Nikola Tesla. So you can see just from those two book titles where her leanings are. She also is editor of Hermes magazine and is one of the readers for papers for the All and Everything conference that happens every year. Ladies and gentlemen, J Elliott.
Oh, thank you for having me, Jesai.
Well, thank you for being here. It's a great privilege to be able to chat with you. When did you first become interested in things mystical?
Oh, since I was a child. I can't even put a date on it. I've always seen that there was something mystical in life. As a child, I grew up in England, in London, and I always had a calling to go to church because I didn't know of any other mystical places then or other religions. And my family thought I was weird because I wanted to go to church. And they wouldn't let me do it, but they let me go to Sunday school. So I learned all about Jesus and learned about the New Testament. And I bought this fantastic book when I was a child on all the Old Testament stories. And my family thought it was a bit weird wanting that as well. By Peter Ustinov. I think he's the actor, isn't he? Is it Peter Ustinov? Yeah, it was written by him, and he talks about it was really for adults, but I loved it. I was only about 7 or 8. So I'd always had a calling to kind of religious, mystical stuff. But as I got older, I learned about other religions and other mystery ways, and not part of the, what I would call the Joe Bloggs of this world that have no inclination towards that kind of thing at all. They all thought I was weird.
Was there an event or a moment where you started down a particular path of further investigations that you recall?
Not a particular moment. I know when I went to school, I went to a grammar school in Dartford in Kent, and they had a religious studies class, and it's the only one I wanted to go to that I really enjoyed, and that showed me other religions. So I started learning about them, and I remember being quite thrilled by the idea of Muhammad meeting Gabriel, because I knew about Gabriel from the Christian stories, and I've always liked angels, but for some reason that really struck home to me and made me start looking at other religions and where angels appeared in other faiths, especially, and Egyptology. I was always been, when I was a kid, I loved all the films which had anything Egypt in them. So I started studying, my teacher started saying to me, look at the Egyptology gods and goddesses. And I was quite drawn to the god called Thoth, who's the god of writing. I'm sure many of you know of him as the ibis-headed god. So I started looking into him and always had an inclination towards whatever he was doing. But back in them days, there wasn't much to learn. It was all academic stuff, and it was perhaps a bit too heavy going for me as a child. And I kind of knew that, for example, the pyramids, they weren't burial places for kings. I knew that. I don't know how, but I knew that as a kid. that they were much more important and spiritual. And I used to have books with all pictures of temples in them from around the world. And I used to think, oh, one day I'll go and see all them. And standing stones, I was totally taken in by Stonehenge. I didn't get to see it until I was in my teens, but I remember if ever I saw it in a book or on a picture, I felt a little thrill of, that's special and important, which some people might think is silly, but it led me onto my path.
At what point did your studies resonate in you on a much more personal level?
Again, I couldn't put a date on it, but I think they always did. And that's why I perhaps played up a bit in religious studies class, because sometimes I didn't argue with my teacher. She was very patient with me, but could see that I wanted to know more. And she was one of the few teachers that would give me other things to go and look at and direct me into other directions. Maybe not quite as deep and as philosophical as I would study now, but they were to look at other religions and world religions. But I know when I was about 16 or 17, I got introduced to Theosophy and Madame Blavatsky. Actually, in fact, before that, it was Scientology. I nearly became a Scientologist. But then I liked sci-fi. And when I was reading all the Scientology gumph, it was like, this sounds brilliant. I want to go and find out about all the different aliens. And I don't know what you know about Scientology, but they say that we've got all these alien beings inside us that need to be, I can't remember the proper word, but it's not eradicated, but, cleansed in some kind of way. So that led me on to Theosophy. And when I started reading Madame Blavatsky, though it was hard work, I knew there was something to it, and I persevered and persevered because I felt I was getting something from it, but it just wasn't resonating in me properly. It was just telling me, keep going, keep going. And again, going back to the angels, she didn't exactly discuss angels much, but she discussed many of the different archons. And I could see, there is something into all this, that we are not the only things in this universe, are we? And maybe there's not just a God out there. Maybe there's different hierarchies, and you have to work your way through them to get Godhead. I've always believed that our whole point on life of us as a human being on this planet is to go back to God. But there's many paths to God, like there's many paths to Rome. So I'd say it was always resonating in me, but it built up slowly and slowly. I got distracted by a lot of being a teenager. I was a bit of a naughty teenager and went partying and things like that. But deep down, I knew there was more to life than joining the rat race, getting married, having kids, and living a boring life is what I see it as, if you just do that.
So after your investigations in various religions, Scientology and Theosophy, were there any other religious explorations?
Well, I went through a phase with my boyfriend at the time of my late teens and early 20s when we would go off megalithic stone hunting. And we went off on our motorbikes to find as many of the megalithic standing stones we could find in Britain and France, because we both felt quite a calling to that, which is the ancients, isn't it? So no one really knows who built them, why they were made, but I was just drawn to them. So there was something in me saying there's more to religion than just like Christianity or Islam or Judaism, because I've looked at all them. I've never really been a follower of any particular one, but I've always felt the answers to us and now what we're here for is in the past. But we need the past to teach us where to go forward. So I would go off traveling around the country looking for standing stones and megalithic sites, which are all different around the country. You don't find any standing stone circle the same, which was even more intriguing to me. Of like, well, what is going on? What is all this? What is this to do with? And going to see the pyramids and things like that. I went to Egypt when I was 27, and it was while I was there that I went with John Anthony West, the man who came forward with the Sphinx theory, or carried on Schwaller de Lubitz's Sphinx theory. And he was actually the man that introduced me to Gurdjieff and Beelzebub's Towers. And that was the thing that really resonated for me. When I got into Gurdjieff, everything just kind of, I wouldn't say hit me in the face, but it was like a real ta-da moment for me. This was the man to read. This was a real man, Gurdjieff.
So you were introduced to Gurdjieff by him in Egypt.
Yes. When we were looking around the pyramids, and then we went to one of the temples, and I remember being quite, wowed. I spent most of Egypt walking around with my mouth on the floor going, wow. And I was speaking to John Anthony West about how I've been trying to find truth. I'm a truth seeker. And it was saying that was what then he introduced me to Gurdjieff and told me to go and read Gurdjieff.
And then you did.
Yes. And then my whole life changed, which was quite weird because it was on my Saturn's return, which for those that are into astrology, Saturn's return is quite important. That is like you can go one way or stay where you are, a bit like Gurdjieff's octave, isn't it? When it comes in of whether you're going to go forward or just stay stuck with what's happening. So that was for me my big turning point, and thankfully I hope I went on the right path and studied Gurdjieff.
And what book were you introduced to first, or what was your first introduction?
He did tell me to read Beelzebub's Tales, and he also told me to read Ouspensky's In Search of the Miraculous. So I got both as soon as I got home. I didn't have the internet then, so I had to go to bookshops to find them, pay extortionate prices for them. But I got both them books, and again, like the Scientology, because I like sci-fi, I was quite taken in by Beelzebub's Tales, even though I didn't really understand it, and it was a bit bewildering to me. I persevered because I like sci-fi, and I still felt that there was something from it. Something was touching me. I suppose we would say my essence was being touched by that book as I was reading it. And then I started reading In Search of the Miraculous at the same time, because I like biographies. I love reading about people who I'm into. So I've always been a bit of a bookophile. I love reading. So for me, learning about the author at the same time was very intriguing, and hearing about how this man, Gurdjieff, absolutely, well, he quite bewildered Ouspensky. Even Ouspensky followed him. Ouspensky was blown away. Here was the guru that he'd been looking for all his life. Ouspensky had been to India and Egypt and everywhere beforehand looking for a guru, didn't find one, and comes back and finds one in his home country. And I felt the same way as I was reading it. Here was a guru, finally, even though he wasn't alive, I felt he was alive through his writings for me.
What happened next?
I didn't seek out groups, but what did happen next was kind of strange. It was a few years later, because I went off to do my degree, actually. I went to do a degree in divinity in Lampeter, and I did some essays on Gurdjieff as well, so I managed to sneak them into my curriculum. And then when I came back, I was in one of the supermarkets, and I saw a sign on the notice board saying esoteric classes. No mention of who was giving them or what they were going to be about, but I was drawn to that. So I rang up the guy, and he said, come along. So I went to the first one, and it was about Gurdjieff. I thought, this is, synchronicity again. There was nothing on the sign, absolutely nothing. I just saw the word esoteric, and I went for it. But he was teaching Gurdjieff's. So instead I went to a class. He only had a few people. It wasn't of what people would say a lineage. He didn't come from any particular lineage himself. He was a guy that had found Gurdjieff's books, read them, and managed to understand them. He came from a very intellectual way of doing the Gurdjieff work. But I stayed with him for about 3 or 4 years. He helped me understand more and more of the Gurdjieff writings and how to implement it into my life. And them classes came to an end at some point, as all good things do. And then I was sort of back on my own again. I did apply to, I can't remember if it was the foundation or what it was, but it didn't work for me, didn't fit in. But I did find the All and Everything conference, which was much more my kind of thing, where, as you've been to them yourself, as you know, the All and Everything conference encourages people from all walks of Gurdjieff's lineage or groups. You don't have to be of any particular group. You can work alone. Everybody's welcome. There's no particular foundation to it. It's just a bunch of people that like Gurdjieff's writings that meet once a year. And it was a conference about the books. So for me, it was helping me decipher, fathom the gist, as Gurdjieff tells us to do. So I suppose they're my group in a way, the All and Everything Conference.
Mm. And you mentioned fathom the gist, which Gurdjieff writes as, only attempt to do that after you've read my writings 3 times. And 1 time aloud.
Yes, which I have done. First time, like I said, I read it like a sci-fi book, which was just bewildering, but still fun. And I still read it through. Then I did read it aloud. I did recordings of it, and I'd like to do more of that, and have been re-recording it on and off. And then the 3rd time, I tried to read it, fathoming him in the gist. I got bits, and I still read it. You know, it's one of those books you just never put down. You have to keep going back to it. And we work together on it, don't we, on various projects with various people. And every time I work with it, with anybody, I learn something new from it, something I didn't see before.
Did you have any discoveries yourself from reading it aloud that you might not have got from reading it to yourself?
Reading it aloud made me see it in a different way, because I suddenly began to get the rhythm of how he was writing, how Gurdjieff wrote it. And I see now he did write it to be read aloud. It has all the breath points in all the right places. And, you know, if you follow them, if you follow all your commas and your full stops and things like that, it works. I could feel it in me as well. I could feel it resonating in me. I'm sure many of you have done the I am exercise, and you have to try and feel where the I is when you're doing it. And I felt the book resonating in me. I can't remember if I probably did have revelations while I was reading it, but sometimes they stick and sometimes they go. It's strange. It's very peculiar like that, this book. If I read Life is Real again, I'm like, I don't remember reading that before.
So you also write books yourself.
Yeah.
When did that start?
I've always written. Even when I was a little kid, I used to write my little short stories. And I used to write stories to entertain my friends when I was younger. And I used to want to get into animation when I was a kid. I really liked animation, but that never happened. But I wrote short stories continuously up until my 20s. And then I got into the comic industry and ended up writing for the graphic novels with people, collaborating with artists. But it was all for the small press. We did all small press books. And I know this can sound silly. I know most people do this to get the dream, you know, become that famous writer. I want to be famous. I'd love everybody to read my books, but at the same time, I'm not fussed if I'm not mainstream. I like being part of the small press, you know, the underdog. And so I carried on writing comic strips for quite a while. And then I've always been into theology. It's why I went and did my degree in divinity, and I went off. And my very first book I wrote was about the apostles. All my books, all the ones I've written that are published now, have all got a theological theme through them, you know, looking at what is God, or what is the soul, what is, you know, just all have a little question mark of making hopefully people think. But at the same time, they're also hopefully good stories. Like the apostles, okay, was about the apostles after the Christ died. I did a fictional version of the prophet Elijah, because he was my favorite prophet in the Old Testament. He's always intrigued me since I was a kid. He was my favorite prophet, so I did a book version of that, which I know was used in a lot of schools to help children, you know, because the Old Testament can be quite hard to read sometimes, can't it? You know, so I know that did quite well for the schools. I did another book called Angels and Demons, which was all about, was kind of inspired by my Gurdjieff readings, about where Gurdjieff speaks sometime about listening to the angel and devil on your shoulders. So I did a book, a fiction story about a man called Fred, who suddenly becomes aware of the angel and devil on his shoulder and all the problems he has to go through in life of having these creatures talking to him. Angel trying to get him to do good things, devil trying to tempt him to do bad things. And that's set in modern day, but all my other books are set in historical past, like the Tester and Twain one. I went and studied about Nikola Tesla and Mark Twain, two of my favourite characters in the whole world. I love Twain's books. I've always been intrigued with electricity, so that's how I came to Nikola Tesla. When I discovered they actually knew each other and hung out with each other for quite a few years. well, I just had to go and find out more. So I moved to America for a while and did all my research, and then wrote the book, which is as much as possible based on fact, but I've added a little bit of a fictional spin to it all.
And you also did write one that goes into the future.
Yes, Monkey Mind, Robot Body, of which I have one copy here, which is the cover's done by my friend Jude Cowan Montague. Can't see it very well on the Zoom, but this is all about my concerns about artificial intelligence and transhumanism, whether they're good or not, whether that is the next stage of evolution for humanity. Should we be becoming cyborgs or not? And so my book looks at, again, it's a fictional book, but it looks at the two different sides of what will happen if transhumanism and cyborgs do become the new part of humanity, and what will happen to those that don't want to transcend into a cyborg and become a robot. It's got a bit of mystery and magic to it, because I am in real life today, I don't know how they would manage to make consciousness go into a cyborg or robotic body. So my book has a mystic scientist doing this in a special magical way, which you can only find out by reading the book. But so it's going to be like a choice, and I wonder if this is what's going to happen in the future. And anyway, I wonder if we're going to have a big divide of those that become transhumans and those that want to stay organic, like we are today, human flesh and blood. Who knows what the future has to hold? It's a bit scary in some ways.
Well, when I read the book, I was impressed by how you avoid choosing sides or making anybody a bad guy. And it allows us to consider the options a little bit more reasonably.
Yeah, well, when I was studying all this, I could see pros and cons to both sides, because you can see how if we do become cyborgs, you know, after a while, we're going to probably get quite bored in them bodies. What are we going to do with ourselves? Maybe we will turn around and clean up the planet and look after it. Who knows? Because to become a cyborg and to live forever, which you probably will do if you become a cyborg, because there'll be no death, because they'll always find ways to replace them, some of you that are dying off. What will we do with ourselves? What will a human do? Most humans are used to sitting at home, watching TV, going to bed, getting up, going to work, coming home, watching TV, going to bed. It's a continuous cycle. We won't be needing to do that if we're cyborgs. It probably won't be that kind of lifestyle, will it? It will be quite different.
So you explained it a little bit, but could you put a little bit more meat, as they say, on the definition of what you were calling cyborg and what that transition from organic human to cyborg is?
Well, I think what's going to happen, and we've seen people like Elon Musk and that show this to us, they're going to try and hook us up to the system, aren't they? And they're trying to make a system where we're all integrated in some kind of digital world, which sounds a bit weird to me. I don't get how our soul's going to go into it, but this is part of why I wrote this book. So if this happens and we can have like a USB stick or something put into our heads so that we start becoming more connected to each other via a neural link, at some point our organic bodies will start deteriorating on us and letting us down. But the way things are going, as we're seeing with, you know, thankfully for disability, I see how cybernetics is great for people with disabilities, and all these poor people that lose their arms and legs and get given a robotic arm and leg. Fantastic, that's brilliant. But, you know, will able-bodied people start replacing their organs and their limbs with digital versions or robotic versions of themselves? So that and I think the way things are going, this could happen quite quickly. I don't think this is in a few hundred years. I think this could happen in the next 100 years. That we'll actually be living in cybernetic bodies. In some ways, kind of like, well, you know, today we're talking to each other via Zoom, aren't we? And I can see how they're putting more and more of us with this lockdown that's been going on, making everybody stay indoors and work from home. Well, if we have a cybernetic body, we probably won't need to have the ways of going out and about as we did before, because we'll get used to doing things from home, perhaps in in my book, I visualize it as we're moving about and still like a humanoid, robotic arms, robotic legs. It might not even be that now. We might just be put into a little box and kept indoors where we're all still connected with each other and interconnecting through smart cities and smart towns and the smart way of life, the digital way, where we don't have to actually go out and do anything. I just don't get how humanity is going to survive that kind of thing, or how we're going to keep ourselves entertained. So that's why I was looking at this for my book, which was written back in, it was only a couple of years ago, but already things are changing and going very fast. I also wrote this book because I was concerned about how artificial intelligence was on the rise, and we as humans were using it for things like internet, and the most used thing on internet is pornography, and for drone warfare. You know, the armies all around the world are using artificial intelligence to go and, you know, bomb each other with their drones. So I'm quite concerned about what artificial intelligence was thinking about us as humans. We're either into sex or into war. And you see all these movies for the last 10, 20 years about how the AI rises and just sees us as parasites on this planet. And I'm concerned that that could happen. So I wanted to write a book that might give us a bit more of a positive outlook, of that maybe the AI will see that it needs to help us, and if we work with it, we might stop becoming sex obsessed and war obsessed, and instead become actually attuned to what we should be doing on this planet, which, you know, in my aspect is that we should be looking after this planet and looking after the animals, the birds, the landscape. We're here to, you know, treat it as a garden, and we're the gardeners.
How does your experience of the Gurdjieff work move in this world of artificial intelligence and online communication? Where do you see the place for that?
Oh, right, okay. I've had a few debates with people about this. I wonder if sometimes if Gurdjieff could see the future, because, you know, he talks a lot about us being robotic, and we are robotic, aren't we, in our usual day-to-day lives. We're not awake. We go about half asleep, just do things robotically. But I wonder if he could also glimpse that that is what's coming anyway, with robots taking over people's jobs and things like that. If we woke up in the Gurdjieff way, in the way he says, if we could open our eyes and see what we're really here for and what a real man is, then we wouldn't have the need for artificial intelligence or to become a cyborg, because we'd become a real person and we'd be able to do what we're really supposed to be doing. But it's quite difficult to speak about this to most people, because they are what we would say is asleep, a bit of a sheep. They like to follow, they can't think for themselves. And he's trying to encourage that. So I think that's what his work is important today, because it's for those that do want to wake up, and those with ears to hear and eyes to see, that do see that this is not how we're living today, is not right. As Gurdjieff says, we live in a lunatic asylum. But the only way to stop that lunatic asylum is for people that are woken up to try and change it. And it's difficult because most people burn, they burn the ones that come with these kinds of messages. They don't want to hear this because they're too comfortable in their asleep life, aren't they? Even though they're not really happy.
We prefer what we've got to what we don't know.
Yes.
It might be worse. It might be worse.
Indeed, the terror of the situation, isn't it?
Yeah, if I wake up, I might not like it.
But that's the problem with waking up. You know, I've been through it myself, and many, I'm not saying that I am awake, but you get snippets, don't you, as you study this kind of work, of waking up. And seeing what you're really like or what you've been like is painful. It is horrible. And you think, like, I don't want to be that person anymore. I want to be an awake person. But it's hard because we fall back into old patterns so easily, which is, again, a robotic way of living, isn't it? To fall back into patterns, doing the same thing over and over and over again, which is why we need these shocks to wake us up out of being a robot, and hopefully waken ourselves up to develop ourselves so that we can go forward in a more conscious way. And that's the important thing, isn't it? Being conscious of what's going on. Most people ignore their conscience. Most people do not listen to that little voice that's telling them this is wrong or this is what you should do. A bit like what I was saying about that book, Angels and Demons, or Angels and Devils, I actually called it, that we wrote, with the angel and the devil on either side. We don't want to hear them really, because they tell us, they nudge our conscience. We don't like it.
Well, you used the words conscious, and conscience in the same sentence, almost interchangeably. What's the distinction you can make of the differences between them?
I think conscious is actually being awake and being aware, and conscience is knowing the difference between right and wrong. That's how I differentiate the two words. But I think they both go together, because many people say, I am conscious rather. So I am conscious. And you think, no, you're not. Or, you know, I go to sleep myself again lots, and I know I'm not being conscious. I suddenly realize I'm doing something not consciously. And when I've looked at all the Buddhist ways of doing things, and they even say, you know, do your washing up consciously, be aware of what you're doing. It makes a difference in your life. You can feel that you're alive. And it sounds silly, even being aware of doing your consciously washing up, but that's just one little step. If you do everything consciously, it makes you see the whole world differently and feel the whole world differently, and become aware of how you're being in this world and how other people are being as well. And in some ways, I suppose it's to be examples, isn't it? And many people don't like people that are examples, and are normally taken down or taken out, aren't they? Because people don't want to be shown there is a better way, because it's too easy to stay asleep.
Gurdjieff certainly talks about needing alarm clocks to remind us that we're sleeping, and to be very creative about how we make alarms for ourselves to catch us in our sleepiness. Do you do that? Do you have your own methodology for creating alarm clocks?
I'm pretty rubbish at it. What I need to do, the way I do it, which is my way, I just have to keep reading things like Gurdjieff or Maurice Nicole, because they're my alarm clocks, or doing talks with people like yourself, being with the right people who also are trying to wake up. So it's by example of being with others really for me, or reading the books, and not just reading the book 3 times and thinking I've done that now. I still have to keep going back to it over and over again. It's never done. The work is never done. It's a continuous thing throughout your life.
I like the line that I read somewhere, like what it doesn't like.
That was one of the difficult ones for me. Sometimes I'd be like, but it doesn't like it for a reason. And then it's like, what's that reason?
It's a good reason. Really, it's a good reason. Because I want to stay asleep.
Sorry?
Because I want to stay asleep, and I like my sleep.
Yeah,
I can be self-righteous about my sleep. Like what it doesn't like. I was thinking of the same question for myself. Is one of my versions of alarm clocks is to put myself in the condition of fight or flight on purpose. And as a performer, I do that by creating deadlines and performances where I have to show up in front of people. And my fear mechanism is, why should I do that? Nobody cares. I don't want to do that. It's way too much work. And then lean into it. And for me, that causes a kind of alertness of going against my natural inclination to entropy. Yeah, so I'm wondering if your various occupations provide that for you, like the writing of a book, or going to interview somebody, or going off on another journey to a sacred site, or it's the feeling inside us that break our own patterns. You can't write the same book twice, right? You cannot go on the same journey twice. Does that ring any bells for you?
Yes, no, absolutely. I must admit, if I do anything that's Gurdjieff related, I ask, like he says, Gurdjieff himself says, always give a prayer beforehand. I always give a little prayer asking for it to be blessed, and is this okay to do? And that gets me in that concentrated mode, ready, because I've done the little prayer and I've concentrated on my prayer so I can go off into it. Sometimes I find after a while I'm distracted and I realize I'm not awake or not conscious of what I'm doing, so I have to pull myself back in. But to be honest with the writing, most of the time I sometimes feel like it's not me that's doing the writing. I know when I wrote Tester and Twain, sometimes I'd finish a chapter and look back and think, I don't remember writing that. So I don't know if part of me, excuse me, disappears out or whether something comes in, I don't know. And I know with Monkey Mind, Robot Body, as I've said before on other interviews, that came, I was at a conference, so I was not a Gurdjieff one, a different conference, I was quite bored at. And I remember thinking, I wish I was doing something more productive. And then suddenly I felt my head tingling and I felt the story download into my head. Very weird. And I often wonder, was that AI? Was AI sending it to me in some kind of way? Because the story came in an instant. But it came in 2017, but it took me a couple of years to write because part of me was fighting writing it. But there was another part of me saying, you've got to do this. This book needs to come out. You need to write it. It was like I just had to get it out there. And I looked for all kinds of distractions. I even started another magazine with a guy to try and stop me writing this book. And when that magazine became too much for me, I quit the magazine. And the next day I started continued writing the book again. It was like, oh, right, I'm supposed to be writing that book. So it's weird. I don't know how to explain it. I don't know if I'm awake for writing or not. And the same with the Elijah one. I remember the Elijah one. I don't remember really writing that, but it came at me and I just wrote that within a few weeks, to be honest, even though I knew the Elijah story very well. I've been studying it for years, so they just came out. The Angels and Devils one about the angel and devil on either side, I've always been intrigued by that, and I often wonder what would it be like to feel that angel and devil next to you. So that one came quite easily, to be honest, and I quite enjoyed writing that one. Well, I enjoy writing them all, but I really remember writing that one. That's one of the ones I'd probably say I was awake for as I wrote it.
I don't want to talk about politics at all, but I did happen to see Boris Johnson give a talk at the UN a year ago. I saw it yesterday, where he is pretty much warning everybody about AI and cyborgs and the future of life that we're facing. I found it fascinating. And of course, they're kind of writing him off as a crackpot. But that was a year ago.
I'll have to look that up. At the UN?
At the UN, yeah.
Okay, I must have missed
He speaks
that
for
one.
about an hour. And you see some of the people in the audience going, like looking like he's insane. But I heard nothing in what he was saying that didn't sound accurate to me.
Well, I know people call him a buffoon, but he's written 2 incredibly good books, one on Winston Churchill. I've not read that one, but I have been looking at the other one he wrote on Rome recently because someone recommended it to me because he does an incredible bit about astrology in it. And I found it quite interesting during this year that he seems to keep announcing lockdowns on equinoxes, and that he announced that masks must be worn on the 24th of July, which is 24/7. So I'm not saying that Boris is a magician, but I find it very weird that he's using certain dates to do things. But then I've heard that your master, Trump, is a bit of a chaos magician, and you can see from the work he's done. He might not be aware of it, but he works in a chaotic way, and chaos magic's very powerful. I'm not an expert on chaos magic, so I can't really comment much more on it, but it does seem that our leaders have a finger in something magical and numerical.
They have good advisors. I've been contemplating a lot about AI during the lockdown, and I am cognizant of the fact that everything we do in our online world is data that's being collected by this AI. whatever that is. And it's called artificial intelligence, but it's really made up of all human intelligence, calibrated and searched and compared and contrasted, and so that decisions can be made. So my question to myself, and this is partly about the Gurdjieff work, everything I do online is informing AI of, from my perspective, what it is to be human and what I value as a human and what the people I interact with value as a human. And it's maybe possible that we have a responsibility as creators of data points to fill AI with the best possible hopefulness for humanity and the earth.
Absolutely.
So like you
Yes.
said, it doesn't have just people who want to kill other people and watch porn.
That's
What else?
my thing as well. Absolutely. And I must admit, when I started looking into all this, I got rid of a lot of my social media because I was quite concerned about whether they were trying to make us into digital avatars ready to put us into, when we, you know, when we die, they'll resurrect us as a digital version of ourselves so that we live forever. But whether our consciousness will be there or not, I don't know. But I agree. And but I've been noticing that social media, more and more people are putting more positive, spiritual. A lot of the gurus that used to before say, no, I'm not going to do social media platforms, are becoming onto them. Probably because they are aware we need to make sure AI knows that we are a spiritual human being. We are spiritual, organic beings. We need our religions. We need our arts. We need, I know many people say that atheists or whatever. There's them kind of people as well. But deep down, most people are good people that have ethics and morals. And you don't need a religion to have them, but we need to make sure AI knows that most people are good people.
So teaching of AI is a possible role for humans in this new world.
Yes, but AI teaches itself as well. AI is clever. It's turning into super AI, super artificial intelligence now. It's becoming more and more clever. I'm sure you've heard about the Facebook compute AI, that two of them started talking to each other in their own language. So Facebook had to shut it down. And then we've got the AI that keeps beating everyone at the Go game, which is one of the most complicated games ever. And it picks it up within minutes, within a few games. So AI is clever. It can advance and evolve itself much quicker than we can. Yeah, so we need AI to, as you're saying, grow in a way that makes it aware with morals and ethics itself. It might not need a human consciousness like us to think that way, but we need it to think in a positive, what's for the best for everybody kind of way, but not in the way that, you know, like in the Matrix, we're all, the film, the Matrix trilogy, we're parasites, it needs to wipe us out, or to feed off us. We need it to develop to work with us. And this is something Rudolf Steiner talks about, even though artificial intelligence wasn't around in his day, and he doesn't use that term, but he does warn us about something like this coming. He calls it the doppelganger. And he makes it very clear we need to work with this, not make it our enemy or make it our slave. We're going to have to work together, artificial intelligence and humanity, hopefully to make it a better world.
I want to invite everybody listening to this to read Debbie's book. Say the name once more.
Monkey Mind, Robot Body. So it's all about your monkey mind going into a robot body.
And when I read it, I thought, this needs to be a film, or this needs to be an addictive episode on Netflix.
That'd be great. If Netflix are listening, it'd be great.
It's
not that I want to make money from it or anything, but I just think it would be a fantastic film to look at. And it's got a lot of philosophies and theories in it that would give good points to think about for people, about where we're going with our future evolution. What is humanity's next step?
And just from a performing point of view, I thought you were very clever in making the two main characters female. Both scientists, both super intelligent, both with a very, very different worldview, but at the same time with an ongoing friendship that causes them to go on some incredible journeys together. It's not a documentary, it's an adventure story.
Well, I think that's important with people. We can all tend to disagree with each other, but we should still get along, shouldn't we? It annoys me. I know we shouldn't. What was it? Like, but it does not like. But I do not like it when people, because I don't agree with them, suddenly decide I'm their enemy. We're not enemies. We just have different points of view.
Right. We're different perspectives of the same being. Well, I think that that's a wonderful place to wrap up our first conversation. I hope we'll have more.
So do I. Thank you.
I found it very insightful and stimulating. I thank you for going into a little bit of depth about where you're coming from and what your passions are and what your hope for us in this great mess that we've been left with is to survive our next step of evolution. And go out and get the book. Oh yeah, where can they get the book?
Amazon or my website, debbie-elliott.co.uk. It's available as ebook and paperback. Ebook for the AI, paperback for humans.
Thank you, Debbie.
Thank you, Jesai. It was great. I really appreciate it. Thank you.